Everyone, thank you so much for listening to the Keynote podcast on speaking engagement. I'm your host, Ryan Catherwood. On the show this week, my special guest is Omar Garriott. Omar is the executive director at the Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. I actually met Omar back in 2013, 2014, in that range, when I was working at the University of Virginia in the Office of Engagement. I was on the lookout for innovators, real change makers in technology, and I came across Omar's LinkedIn profile back at the time period when Omar was actually working at LinkedIn. In fact, he was on the higher ed team along with my week one keynote guest, John Hill. Over the years, I've followed Omar's career from the West Coast, where he was at Salesforce and Qualtrics, and then he became a co-author of a book on how to use LinkedIn to find a job or an internship, to his current role at the Batten Institute. I wanted to have Omar on the podcast because few people have a real sense of the world of entrepreneurship, alumni engagement, but also intrapreneurship. Omar talks about how hard it is at universities to really make important changes in order to keep up with the times, and how liberal arts institutions, which thrive on traditions and on doing things consistently over the course of years and who are quite good at it, really need to make adjustments in important ways. How to lead those teams forward. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Omar Garriott. Thank you so much for listening, whether you are tuning in on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on your favorite podcast app, or maybe Substack. I really appreciate you making this podcast part of your routine. If you haven't already, do sign up for our Agora with Mo Cotton Kelly from the Yukon Foundation coming up this Friday, June 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, thank you so much for listening to the Keynote podcast. Enjoy my conversation with Omar Garriott. Omar Garriott, thank you so much for being the keynote on speaking engagement this week. It's so great to have you on.
So awesome to be here, Ryan, to see you. And I'm repping UVA, your old stomping grounds today, for your hundreds of thousands of viewers.
Someday, maybe that many, but you've got that kind of viewership, my friend. I first came upon you actually when I was at UVA, and I was doing digital engagement. And of course, at the time, LinkedIn was really, I guess I would describe it still as up and coming in the space for higher ed anyway. And lo and behold, one of the very people that did digital engagement and was a UVA alum was actually leading the way at LinkedIn. And since that time, you, of course, have had quite a journey working at Salesforce and Qualtrics, and you've co-written a book on how to find a job. You are a mentor to entrepreneurs through Techstars. Maybe you could tell listeners who don't know you quite as well about your path and what led you to the Batten Institute.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a bit of a circuitous route. One of my jobs in tech was at Apple, so I'm a big believer in the Steve Jobs line from his famous 2004 Stanford graduation speech, in which he said, if you follow your interests and your passions, the dots of your life and career will connect, but only in reverse, right? You can't look forward and connect those dots. And I think that's really been true for me. I started my career as a Teach for America teacher. I worked in a nonprofit that helped low-income kids enroll in college for a few years after that. Did a lot of coaching. I kind of had that like teacher at core sort of thing, and have always loved education. Felt like it got me to where I got to really where I had choice in life, and was lucky enough after business school to be able to spend 15 years working in companies that had real scale and reach into the education sector. And that was, name a big tech company. I got to probably spend some time there, which was a really cool chapter. The LinkedIn part of that journey that you mentioned was especially cool because I joined right after the company had gone public and was kind of flush with cash, and they were looking at new audiences that they could grow and not even needing to really monetize these things. They said, hey, students in colleges is a real opportunity. That's where actually people need to start to build their personal brand, something that you had been championing for a long time. And colleges, believe it or not, did not even have their own presence on LinkedIn. There were kind of these like alumni groups that schools had, but they weren't really a great product, frankly, from LinkedIn's perspective. They weren't investing in it. They weren't super dynamic. They didn't allow the kind of engagement that schools wanted. So we said, hey, let's just create these home pages for schools on LinkedIn, what we now know as company pages or school pages, with a whole bunch of features that made the data easily sortable in terms of what alumni are up to, showcase different parts of the school. And it seems like a no-brainer now, but it was kind of a big deal at the time. And then all the stuff we did with college students to make them the fastest growing demographic on LinkedIn. Now I feel like it's just 10 years later, it's table stakes, right? If you're a college student or even a high school student, you need to have a LinkedIn presence. But that was not a given back in the day. I remember doing focus groups with college students at the time, and they would say, "Oh yeah, I think I know LinkedIn. It's like Facebook for old people." And it's funny, right? Because Facebook is now Facebook for old people. And so anyway, that was a really interesting chapter. I loved in all of my tech jobs how I got to interface really substantively with um, K-12 and higher ed customers. That's really what I love, is helping schools and educators do the magical and vital work that they do better. And I also started a company that was serving mostly higher ed with career centers, using some of those LinkedIn insights that I got, and wrote the book you mentioned. So I'd always orbited around education and decided about 4 years ago to just get back into it fully. So that's when I joined the University of Virginia, of which I'm a proud graduate, as you, if you're watching, can tell. Um, and joined in this capacity, leading what I believe to be the country's largest or second largest entrepreneurship and innovation center affiliated with the university. I'm embedded within the Darden School of Business, which is the graduate only school at UVA, which is
Not to be
also an interesting,
confused with the McIntyre School of Commerce.
yes, of which I am a graduate. So UVA is an interesting place in which you have two wholly separate business schools, though we do our best to collaborate across those. But I've got a little bit of the entrepreneurship stuff. I've got a lot of what I would describe as the intrapreneurship stuff, which I view to be a very comparable skill set, which is driving change within organizations, right? I loved being a product manager for iPad in education. I would not have been interested in being a product manager for iPad, right? So getting to have that through line of real scale and reach and impact in classrooms was the animating feature of my career. And I didn't always feel that. My last couple jobs, I was running these big education divisions for these companies, and got increasingly far removed from the day-to-day work of teaching and learning. And that wasn't, that's probably why I left those jobs, right? And so this whole idea of getting back into higher ed proper was to be more proximate to students and that impact. And we could talk about the extent to which that's been true, but it's really cool to be in a space where I feel like my job is to kind of enable young people, and to some extent alumni's dreams of putting their vision into the world.
I've always appreciated you and your journey back to UVA from the West Coast, following along your career. For those listeners who aren't familiar with the Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology, share a bit about the role that it plays at Darden, at UVA, and just about your work day to day.
First, just to return briefly to the LinkedIn topic you raised, it's been interesting to see some backlash now among younger people around a lot around LinkedIn. So whole nother topic. I know that's not what we want to necessarily dive into today, but um, I just want to say real quick, go on the record that LinkedIn is not social media in the way you think of other social media sites, and the conflation of it with that, with this sort of like quick bite, peacocking, everything's fake culture that we, the cynicism that we all probably feel now is not like, you should not apply that to copy paste to LinkedIn. The problem is there's so much noise on it now that it's hard to distill what actually matters, which is what I tried to do with the startup, what I tried to do with the book, which is how to find and get found for a great job. And that involves networking, it involves storytelling, it involves reaching out to people who actually know what these jobs are, and can not only help you focus, but help you get in the door. And so the exercise is to just cut through the clutter, cut through the noise, and find the signal, which still really exists on LinkedIn in more so than any other place. Batten Institute is the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center within the Darden School. You could argue it's also kind of serves that purpose and has for many years served that purpose for the larger University of Virginia. We're a pretty decentralized institution in which the entities with the most resources, the most desire and interest in doing things cross grounds, we call it grounds here, not campus, can sort of do that. And the Batten Institute's been lucky to have the blessing of those resources. We were born of a $60 million gift 25 years ago. So you can imagine that's grown very significantly. And I have a really large team that gets to run co-curricular programs in entrepreneurship. We are trying to inculcate this strong belief that I have and that we have, that innovation and entrepreneurial mindset and skill set is learnable and measurable and increasingly invaluable to any career, whether or not you want to be an entrepreneur proper. And that's been my experience professionally, and what I think is especially true now in our world of AI-driven disruptions. So we stand for that. We get to run the largest scholarship program within Darden. We do a lot of work cross grounds with UVA and a new entity that's trying to sort of coordinate things a little bit more centrally called UVA Innovates. It's a fairly recent thing. We run a pan-university summer incubator, which is a really intensive and immersive experience for students who are very serious about their ventures and have already gotten some traction, in addition to some alumni and even faculty ventures who join us for that. And so we get to run a whole bunch of cool programs. We get to sponsor and work closely with faculty and translate some of their ideas to a larger audience of practitioners. And we've also spread our wings a bit into a little bit of my background as well into tech and AI, because that was sort of a bunch of individual stars in our ecosystem that needed to be connected a little bit better into a constellation. And so we've kind of helped represent that as well within Darden and the university. Interestingly, as any listeners from higher ed know, we have a lot of challenges with silos in communication and kind of who does what. And so AI has been one of those areas for Darden specifically, because we've also recently had a $50 million gift to establish an ethics and AI center. So figuring out kind of where we should focus relative to the Lacrosse Institute at UVA has also been a new thing that we're, in a previously kind of open space to do whatever we felt needed to be done for the students and alumni. It's been fun to say, hey, there's a lot of important stuff we need to be examining, researching, preparing students for around ethical decision making, but also that leaves a whole bunch of areas that still need to be addressed. So I think the university is blessed to have resources like this and entities like the Batten Institute to kind of keep an eye on what's really happening and make sure that we're kind of staying on top of, maybe even ahead of certain trends and curves, whether it's hiring, whether it's technology, whether it's this entrepreneurial mindset and skill set, because the world is changing really fast. and higher ed is notoriously slow in adjusting to those changes. I don't think that's universally true across entire institutions, because you have entities like us and many others that are trying to keep close tabs on what's happening. But we can just turn on a dime much more quickly than you can create entire new courses or degree programs or expect faculty to stay on top of all of the changes, right? We bring in real world expertise, and sometimes we even have students or alumni training each other on some of this stuff. So we're really future looking, and I think that's an important role within the university.
UVA is a complex, extraordinary place with so much innovation and thought leadership and world renowned faculty and administrators that are really charting the course forward for the rest of us.
It's been interesting though that to be representing entrepreneurship and innovation and AI in a school that actually has a really long history, legacy even of liberal arts. There is a history of innovation there, right? Thomas Jefferson himself was an entrepreneur, but in some ways it's a new muscle for the school to say, hey, we're really turning toward the future as well and not just doubling down on our historic strengths. And that's a challenge for any organization, right? We call it innovator's dilemma. But I think there's so many pockets of exciting things happening that I have really felt for the first time being part of this community fairly recently.
Innovation at a school with so much tradition
Right,
is a natural conflict point
right.
where you're looking to make significant change and there's a holding on to all the things that are beloved through the years of experience, and it's not just for students but faculty and staff. And what have you noticed about this moment that we're in and the work that you're doing building an ecosystem where innovation is thriving? And what are the ingredients that matter the most as you think about bringing people together around innovation and solving problems?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's happening right now for sure is a bit of, maybe not quite, but we're approaching a somewhat existential crisis for higher ed. We have college going rates that are lower than they've ever been in multiple generations. The now majority of college age people in this country are not in college or have a college degree. Of course, we all know this ROI is being questioned, right? And sometimes at the um, more highly ranked, let's call them top tier schools, there is a little bit of a what I find is a little bit of a complacency around that. It's not that we don't feel that existential threat, but we don't feel it as acutely as the small liberal arts school, private liberal arts schools in the Northeast that are closing, every other week, right? That's just a reality. In fact, UVA had a record number of applicants this year. But that is like a thing that is happening in the background that is everybody's aware of and is going to probably at some point and already in certain ways impact the business of what a top university does. We know that entry level hiring in general, not just for UVA grads, but in general is down. I think some studies have shown 35% plus in the last 3-4 years. Engineering majors or computer science majors just at UVA the last few years have been down about the same amount. It's really hard to start and build a career now in as a knowledge worker and a college educated worker in the same way that it was in the past. And I work with a lot of students and hear a lot of stories about how even MBAs are kind of taking any job that they can get to start to build their experience and their narrative and their networks. And and it's just that, like, it's not that the jobs aren't out there. It's just the power starting to shift and the selectivity of the hirers is a little bit. It just maybe you have two options instead of five, right, as a UVA grad. And so I think that's a larger thing that's happening. Another thing that's happening in concert with that, and probably partly because of that, is a real rise in the interest in entrepreneurship. And you know, the last couple years, entrepreneurial activity in the United States has been at a historic high. I think November of last year to January of this year, there were 1.6 million new business applications created, which is the highest in any quarter for at least 20 years. And of course, a lot of this is both made possible by and driven by AI, because it's so much quicker to build products, to ship them, to get quick customer feedback, to try to make a sale, even to streamline operations, to building a website. And all the pieces of like starting a business are just, the barriers are lower now. The time to market is faster, and the ability to like see if your idea is crap or not. Um, yeah, and you know, this used to take years for people to even know, and then you'd be like so far down the road, it'd be hard to pivot. But it's also reflecting a bit of this necessity entrepreneurship, which is to say, people still want choice in life. Maybe they are feeling like there isn't the same abundance of choice that they used to have, and we're just seeing a lot of people decide, hey, I'm just gonna try to do this on my own for now. And I think that what I've always believed and what I knew to be true in my days in Silicon Valley, but I think is still true, is like, that's a really good career choice. Even if your startup doesn't make it, if you can afford the opportunity cost of trying to build something yourself, it's going to make you valuable to employers, because it shows what are the skills that are in shortest supply right now. Talk to any manager and they will say it's hunger, drive, scrap, dedication, reliability. These are, it's not pedigree. It's not necessarily even smarts, because we all have AI at our fingertips now, right? Uh, it is just that desire and ability, that ability to connect with humans and drive change, to show up and work hard. That more than anything, that resilience, that scrap, that passion is what an entrepreneur has to do. So my argument is that this is a discipline that is inherently actually cross-disciplinary, forces you to learn by doing every part of business, and builds those really important soft skills and human-centered skills that are going to become increasingly critical in our AI world, that gives you additional value to employers should you decide, I got to go do that. I remember when I worked in tech, just throwing job offers at people who had been doing a startup, even if they'd only been doing it for 6 months and it totally had failed, right? So that gives you career currency. The other thing is that this is super interesting to young people, to Gen Z and even younger. There are some studies showing that half, maybe even 3/4 of them want to be entrepreneurs someday. The majority of people who have full-time jobs now are actually also side hustling or side stacking. It's just become much more the norm, much more accepted, and it doesn't need to be like a career path unto itself if it doesn't work. It's something that people are, especially younger workers, are turning to to just explore whether this could be a thing. And we also know at the same time that while these jobs are starting to change in terms of the classic 9 to 5, people are also not super engaged in their jobs. A recent Gallup study showed as much as 80% of people say they're disengaged at work. Well, what's a good answer to that? Doing something outside of work that does align to your interests and passions. And yeah, maybe for some people you could monetize someday. So I think we're seeing this combination of things that are really interesting right now for the higher ed sector, in terms of how the job market is changing very quickly for college grads. And actually their unemployment rate is now the same as high school grads, right? Which is kind of crazy and would
Mind-boggling.
not have
Yep.
said you've not said for many generations prior, right? That was always the promise of a college degree, is that ticket to the middle class. Well, so the job market is changing. The embrace of the kind of like uncritical embrace of higher ed as a career ladder for and social mobility for a lot of young people and families is changing, and that ROI being questioned. And then you also have these attitudes changing toward entrepreneurship, whether it's by possibility or necessity or even agency. And so I think the fusion of all of these things is coming together at a really interesting time in which schools at all levels, K through 20, I think really need to embrace entrepreneurship education as required. We should be teaching the entrepreneurial method like we do the scientific method. This is life skill, it's career skill, it makes you employable. It is the fastest teacher for what it takes to make it in the real world and actually build those skills. And we need to be embracing this much more fully in this age of disruption and AI.
We had John Hill, your former colleague, on another keynote episode, and he talked about the change is about from finding a job to being the job. And the idea that you need to have um, entrepreneurship training throughout the college experience. And that, of course, his company, WAP, is not the education piece, but the execution piece, the platform by which you would build your business of one, or and utilize what you know as a college student or a young person to sell your expertise. How do you think that this plays out over the coming years at a place like UVA? I am sure you've described this belief that entrepreneurship ought to be part of every student's education. And I've got no doubt lots of people at the institution are nodding heads and saying, yes, 100%. Fast forward for people, what you see as the likely formula that schools, maybe all of them, will adopt in terms of helping students from the moment they arrive, even through a graduate education, to understand how to build a business.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too transactional about it. I think one of the challenges with that higher ed is feeling right now is that many more students than previously, and certainly we feel this at the MBA level, can approach the educational experience as a transaction, right? And we see that with the cutting of liberal arts, like Syracuse, and so there's a ton of value in a classic liberal arts education. Darden prides itself on the Socratic method and case-based education, which is all about being in dialogue with faculty and with your peers to accelerate your learning and to kind of like round that out in a different way. And it's very human-centered in a way that I think is going to hold up pretty well in this environment. But we still don't really know what we're producing. Like, we don't have assessments at the end of higher ed. We don't have them at the MBA level. We don't have career certifications in the way we don't have standardized tests. I'm not advocating that we should, but sometimes I think we can hide behind the veil of critical thinking as the key skill we're teaching, and building, without really being able to know that or measure that. And what's interesting is, like, if you look at all of the studies from World Economic Forum, GMAC, and other entities, the skills that are going to be in demand by hirers are, yes, AI literacy and just general technological fluency, but that's increasingly going to become table stakes. Like, knowing how to use AI for your job specific role, you're going to have to do that. Companies want to hire not just you, but you plus AI, 1+5, right? The next layer of durable skills, I think, is really interesting, and this is where I see education, if we're smart, doubling down and really focusing on, which is not just the AI and tech stuff. That's table stakes. We have to actually be more nimble to make sure we're getting that in the education experience. It's more than just the faculty, like, knowing how to use it and bringing it into the classroom. It's actually like co-curricular stuff, building something, doing vibe coding while you're there to build things and actually get hands-on with these tools and bringing in real practitioners who are actually using them. But it's that next layer of durable skills: curiosity, right? Creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, leadership, social influence, motivation and self-awareness, as I talked about earlier, empathy. These are straight from World Economic Forum in terms of skills that are going to be required in 2030. And so I think what institutions are hopefully going to realize, and UVA and Fits and Starts is realizing it, is like, that is our job, to build and possibly measure those skills, and that is still the durable role of education at all levels, is to do those things, and really just clarifying that that's our mission, when there is so much noise out there about all the things that are going to be required. And again, I don't want to be too transactional and imply that the purpose of higher education is to get a good job, or to even get a job, period. But I do think that that's how our customers, right, students and their parents, are looking at this product now. And I think it's really important that we don't ignore that, don't bury our head in the sand about that, and go back to the old tried and true, everything. And we talked earlier about tradition versus innovation at a school like UVA. Our customers are challenging us and voting with their feet now. Um, and we just, even a school like UVA cannot rest on its laurels. So if these are the skills that we know are going to be in demand, that are still going to produce, that is going to give graduates value to organizations and to the world, then we need to raise our focus on the question of how we're building those. Are we building those things better than other ways you could build those, right? Online,
Yeah.
DIY, by doing your own startup, like do in lieu of maybe education, or not finishing your education. It's a very small subset. And look, I used to work in college access. Like, I was the poster child for college is the ticket to everything you want in life. And that happened for me. I had my college diploma in my classroom as a Teach for America teacher. That was like core belief number one. I worked at a nonprofit for many years that helped low-income kids go to college, because it was like, if we did that, our work was done, and they were going to end poverty intergenerationally in their family, right? And I still think that's mostly true, but it is a really small subset of students who are 17, 18 years old and can engage fully in the academic experience of learning about all of these different topics, and really want to learn, and also be reflective enough to make that self-learning as well. And the goal of college is not to produce more college professors. That's just always going to be a small sliver of people. So how do we make sure we're a product for the masses? I think it has to incorporate a lot more hands-on elements, and this is where entrepreneurship education comes in. And it doesn't always even need to be thought of as something wholly separate. Like, yeah, we should do entrepreneurship training. We should have classes in that. We know how to teach that. There are tried and true best practices and strategies, and we've actually created a curriculum for high schools to do that. We've authored a study teaching it, offering this to secondary students, high school students in the entire country of Norway for an entire, like, for many years. Actually, this was a longitudinal study for like 20 years, where the entire country offered it to all of their students, and seen a 40% increase in venture creation 3 years after high school. Like, we know how to do some of this. We should offer that, but we also got to be thinking, how do we make all of the things that we do in education, all of the topics, all of the courses, all of the co-curricular programs, more practical, more hands-on? How do we incorporate entrepreneurial thinking into everything we do? And it isn't even just the student-facing products. It's our operations themselves. It's how we innovate ourselves in this moment, which is calling for that. It's our business models. It's our tech investments. It's how we collaborate as different units within higher ed. It's how we show up in a coordinated fashion for students and alumni. It's how we make sure we create a strong and lasting brand in the face of some brand erosion of the overall sector. This is a moment that requires innovation at the institutional operational level as well.
I'm going to set up a scenario or a equation here and let you cook on it for a minute. I saw an article recently published in the New Yorker that said, you may have seen this as well, that says why the future of college could look like OnlyFans. And for those people who aren't familiar with OnlyFans, it's a
Uh-oh, we're going
platform
there? We're going there?
whereby, what's that?
We're going there?
We're gonna go there. We're gonna go to OnlyFans, and we're gonna try to bring it back to knowledge work instead of the what it's typically used for. But the idea behind it is that often is the case on OnlyFans that there are adult workers who use it to essentially build their own businesses. The premise of OnlyFans in the construct of education is that imagine, my son is 14 years old and will soon be approaching the college years, and imagining a future whereby I get to help him select the knowledge workers that I am going to pay for him to layer on top of his college experience. Someone like Omar Garriott, where I say, listen, I know you're going to get some of these fundamentals as part of your college experience, but what I'm also going to do for you is I'm going to hire these other experts to improve the caliber and quality of your educational experience. And meanwhile, you have faculty members beginning to do this all on the side. And so you talked about sort of the education and the entrepreneurship of education itself, the operations of it. And I think it's more of a catchy headline, right? It's going to look more like OnlyFans and I'm going to click on that one. But what do you think about this notion of how we are going to be providing education for our kids, or how people are going to be providing it for themselves, and the ability to customize the instruction that they get based on their interests in finding professionals, academics who can provide it?
Yeah, I think look, the promise of that has always been the holy grail in education. As long as I've been in it, 20, 25 years, this truly personalized learning, right? That was the promise of the entire previous ways of ed tech, the MOOCs, all of that. I saw that Khan Academy just launched a thing with TED and ETS. It's the future of the university, the AI driven university. Right? There's always that promise. What feels like it has changed, and come back to me in 5, 10 years when we might look back on this wave and say that was another fad, right? Is that the technology is actually finally starting to catch up with that. I think we can take as a premise that something needs to change, right? We talked about how college going is on the decline. You also have in high schools a whole lot of disengagement. Like there's a study that 46% of students are disengaged in high school. Not like mildly engaged, actively disengaged. And that is almost half of students who, if they're disengaged in high school, we can probably expect they're not going to go to college, right? Or if they do, they're going to continue to be disengaged or transactional or even cynical, right? And we all know the dropout rate is really high as well in higher ed, and that's a huge cost. So I think we start from that premise that something needs to change, and probably a whole bunch of things in concert with one another. In addition to the reality that the technology has changed in such a way that we can start to really get atomic insights, like student level insights, and tailor things to their interests and actually their abilities, their proficiencies, how they're scoring on specific things. You have entire AI schools now, like the Alpha School, which is growing at the K-12 level. I have some critiques about the model, but the idea is you can save a whole bunch of instructional time if you can just provide truly bespoke education for a student when they need it at the level they're at, and you can shrink 2-hour long language arts classes into 30 minutes when it's really tailored. Now, should we just be outsourcing that to algorithms and bots? I don't know. But that frees up a whole bunch of time to do experiential education like entrepreneurship, which I think is also really interesting and promising. I can remember 20 years ago when I graduated from Berkeley, my business school, the dean saying, hey, business education needs to change to be much more what you're describing, more on demand. And there's even been this idea talked about within Darden recently that I don't think we're going to do anytime soon. But it was an interesting conversation among the leadership of like, should this just become a membership organization? You buy a membership to Darden and you get pieces of education when you need it, maybe taught by the people you need it from throughout your lifetime. And I think the whole movement around lifelong learning and executive education is super interesting. To me, that's the most interesting part of higher ed right now, because that is where I see things going. And I always think about the fact that I did not need to learn how to manage people, like management classes in my business program when I was 26, which is when I learned it. I needed to know it at 36 when I had to fire a 60-year-old, for the first time. Like that was really hard and I didn't know what I was doing. I would have loved to have taken that class then. So I
Yeah.
think at the same time, the world's moving in that way. You can DIY anything now. We got this micro learning trend. Um, Again, we cannot bury our head in the sand. And I think there's a lot of data showing that this is the way things are moving. I'm not sure whether higher ed will truly be able to pivot toward that and with the speed that's necessary.
Yeah, I wonder
But
whether other types of organizations are just going to beat higher ed to the space.
yeah,
And
I mean, the thing that higher ed still has is immense brand power, right? And so like they actually could do it more easily than most other places who have to like build that brand and credibility. But if the
yeah,
employment contract, right, that implicit, sometimes even explicit compact with employers, you are going to get a good job. If it used to be like, you come here, you get a good degree. I remember thinking when I graduated from UVA quite arrogantly that I'm never going to be unemployed again. I remember sitting in my graduation ceremony thinking like, I will never be unemployed. This is amazing. And I'll never have to worry again because I grew up in a like lower income family. And that's not true anymore. That's just not true. And so like, are we gonna rest on our laurels or are we gonna say, and it's not like wholesale shift that I've learned this in 4 years in higher ed. You got to pilot things. This language of like moving the entire tanker ship is usually not the way things work. Some of this will be agitated by disruptors and
yeah,
they'll start to like
yeah.
take off little bits of market share. I mentioned I run the largest scholarship program at UVA with the Batten Institute, and we've had a number of students who we've offered full ride 2-year scholarships to, which is over 150, $175,000 value. Say not just I'm choosing this other business school over Darden, but I'm just not going to go. Period. And that is very concerning to me if we cannot speak to the alternative and have a competitive advantage relative to that. So it's not that they're saying like, I'm going to piece this together on YouTube and Coursera and LinkedIn Learning just yet, but um, how are we providing a product that is durably valuable relative to the experience that you can get, experience as a teacher, which I think the answer in part has to be we have to bring the experience into education itself. And that's where I see a real role for entrepreneurship education.
Thinking about alumni engagement, advancement, and the involvement of alumni in helping shape the future of their alma maters and the institution, how do you interact with Darden alumni or other UVA alumni who want to help solve some of the problems of the moment, or how do you fit them into the work that you're doing, building a community of entrepreneurs at the Batten Institute? Share some of your tips and tricks for what you think that is most important for engagement professionals to be thinking about as we're navigating this moment and involving alumni who want to help.
Darden is prolific at fundraising. We've raised a shit ton of money, like over $600 million during this most recent campaign, or the deanship, who's now the president of UVA. Yeah, but like a lot of schools, I think often we get the complaint that we tend to approach alumni fairly transactionally as donors. This is where I think entrepreneurship could have a very special and unique value, because they love it. Alumni love it. They reach out all the time, want to know not just how we can support them in their ventures, but what else is happening in the community and even with the school that they can get involved with. It's exciting to think about entrepreneurship. It's literally the realm of new ideas, new possibilities. They also have routinely approached us, and even we've had groups of alumni come together and approach the school, including the Batten Institute and the advancement office, with ideas of how we could better support and cultivate the entrepreneurship community of alumni, like programs and even technologies that we should build and start to do that more systemically. And we know this from the data. A lot of our students don't end up becoming entrepreneurs right after graduation. Right? At our school, they will typically go into fields like consulting and finance, but we know they come back to it. 15, 20, 25% of our alumni are entrepreneurs, founders. And we also know that the average age of a successful entrepreneur is 42. The average age for a venture-backed entrepreneur is like 46. There's a really fertile opportunity for alumni offices and advancement offices to offer entrepreneurship programming, because that's the moment that many alumni find themselves in. And a lot have also been affected by layoffs, especially in sectors like tech, because of AI. So I think it's a really great way to reconnect not just alumni, but connect them back to the institution. I actually struggle to think of anything that can be more connective than maybe athletics, which, like, fine. But they love it. We have at alumni reunions every year, we have these pitch sessions where we have current students who are entrepreneurs pitching their ventures, and these sessions are packed to the gill. And I kicked off one of them by saying, like, hey, these students are just exploring their ventures. They're not looking for funding. And I had an alum raise their hand right away and said, well, why aren't they looking for funding? We have money. You should always be looking for funding, and make the ask. So, like, they want to help. If there's one thing that alumni feel is like that visceral connection to an institution, to a brand. And my experience has been, you feel that even more the older you get and the more resourced you get to be able to, like, lend a hand back down. The other thing I'll say that we've seen a lot of interest from alumni in is not just entrepreneurship and investing proper, but a sort of sub-discipline called entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA, which is this whole emerging industry around, that's kind of like private equity, in which you buy a small business. And this is becoming increasingly popular with not just MBAs, but alumni, especially those like 5, 10 years out, but also mid-career, even later career, people saying, hey, including because of some of the disruptions from AI, I just want to get local. I'm going to find a business that has positive cash flow. Maybe I can pump it full of sales and marketing and some AI and eventually, sell it. But it's going to be something I do for a little while. That appeal of something real is really becoming more popular, and it takes some of the risk out of traditional entrepreneurship, because there's a lot of entities that actually fund these students and alumni to go do these searches and de-risk that path a bit. So, we've had some webinars with our alumni career services teams that have had hundreds of people on them around ETA. that is something I see emerging, and it's at every school. This is also undergrad alumni. Um, it's a really popular thing. So I would say, even if it's just creating a space, like open up a Zoom meeting every week for or every month for alumni who want to be entrepreneurs, maybe already are and are at different stages, maybe birds of a feather in certain industries. Maybe you're pairing founders with potential funders. There's all kinds of ways you can do it, but even just opening up the space for alumni to talk to each other about this, I think is going to help create stronger community and stronger affinity to the school. I think it's a great place for alumni offices to be exploring, and it's one that we're increasingly invested in.
Not only are you an expert in entrepreneurship, you're also someone who has worked to leverage the creator economy to be front and center and to help drive the conversation. You have a great Substack, of which I'm a subscriber. And I wanted to ask you about the creator economy, the attention economy that we're in, and how you think alumni advancement teams should be dialed in on the changes that we're seeing into how what captures people's attention and how do you keep it in a world where everybody's vying for it?
No, it's so hard. It's such a great question. This is another area where just innovation has to be the ethos. And that's something I respect about you so much, Ryan. I feel like you've always had these super innovative approaches to digital engagement. It's all to say the tried and true methods are need to be put under a microscope. I think the power of peer voices, like how do you find and elevate authentic ambassadors um, with whatever they want to say actually is really important. Like with the Substack we have, we're trying to increasingly get alumni contributors and things, not just like our voice we're trying to put out in the world. You know, brands are not built or strengthened anymore by a brand campaign or a top-down like approach a school or an advancement office is trying to do. I think I think that still has some value, but it's the little scraps that people happen upon, right? And we're in a moment where like that could be built just as strongly from some alum posting something that goes viral as it does your perfect brand campaign or fundraising campaign that you're kicking off. And so it's how do you democratize those voices? You got to be scrappy and be reaching out to people who have followings and things like that. Think about the influencers who are already within your alumni community. And then there's the obvious things like video, right? It's just like you have to do those things now. Everybody's attention spans have shrunk. Um, I would also be like embracing AI for content creation. We run a whole thought leadership team within my team, and like it's been a little bit anathema to like embrace that fully because it's like we still want to produce the thing. But like, I mean, your cycles can be so much faster if you use it as a co-author. So it's okay. You're right. You have to decide your own comfort level with that. But in some ways, the answer to all this, all this attention seeking and all this competition for your attention is to also just flood the zone. Like to be like people need to see things 7 times before it resonates, right? So like you also do have to be not just producing quality stuff with video, with voices that have following, but also like producing a lot more stuff is just part of it. And there are tools to help you do that. The last thing I'd say is like human interest stuff is always interesting. Nothing connects you more to an institution. This is part of why I love entrepreneurship is like celebrating the entrepreneurs, and there's always more in your community than you can think of. Start with some LinkedIn searches of your alumni base. But people love those stories. They really do cut through the clutter. And if you can get them to tell their own story too, ideally on video, that helps a lot too. I look at the metrics from some of our properties, and sometimes I think we're producing this great content that's like distilling this amazing piece of research or whatever it is, and it's going to be so useful to people, and barely resonates. But that like profile of an alum that we did, which they were motivated to share themselves as well, and that's part of it, got so much more traction and pickup. So just knowing that, and I think you compare those things. You can combine them. You can have an authentic alum voice that you're and career journey that you're celebrating, and also ask them to produce some original content around that too. So you don't have to do all the work. Use AI, use the alumni, but you do have to create more and different formats of it.
Omar, in the last minute or two I've got you, could you just share how folks who are part of speaking engagement could follow along your work, whether that's through Batten or whether that's through your other digital that you power personally? Just for those listeners who have now been captivated by Omar Garriott and his vast knowledge of entrepreneurship, how can they engage with you moving forward?
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Just connect with me on LinkedIn to learn more about the Batten Institute. You can just go to batten.institute, and there you'll find links to subscribe to our Substack and things as well. Um, I think it's really awesome what you're doing, and I'm really excited to see where our beloved sector is going to land, and more importantly, where we're going to experiment in this interesting crucible of a moment we're in. And I just want to kind of agitate for some of that change, given my background. But really excited to be a part of how this all unfolds, and to have champions and leaders like you, bringing voice to some of the cool things happening in the broader world.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Ryan.